Warren, welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast, mate. A pleasure as always to speak to guests on the show who can offer value to the audience. I think today is going to be a real interesting one. So appreciate you joining me, man.
Thanks for having me on board.
Mate, I wanted to get stuck straight into it and ask you, first up, obviously everyone listening at the moment has been experiencing the effects of COVID-19 and the probably mental effects more so than physical, of how stressful it can be having the unknown and I guess the stress of not knowing what each week is going to entail. As a race car driver, obviously it's there's a lot that's outside of your control when it comes to race day. Other drivers, whether or not their car has any stuff ups and whatnot. So mentally, you've got to be prepared for the unknown. So have you found over the past, say, 12 to 18 months that you've been able to deal with all these difficulties of the stress of coronavirus a little bit better because you've been prepared in a way, I guess, of dealing with the unknown?
Yeah, look, I think it's, like you said, especially with what we do, the mental side of it is just as important as the physical. But yeah, look, over this last 12 to 18 months, I think the whole mental health thing has really become sort of very apparent right through sort of coronavirus and lockdown and everything like that, is because obviously, as we've seen, this is affecting everyone. It's not just sort of, it's not something that's out offshore or anything like that. And yeah, look, it's been pretty tough. And but look, for me, I sort of consider myself quite lucky, live up here on the Gold Coast, and in comparison to some of the southern states, especially right now, we had our own little lockdown here sort of a bit over a week and a half ago that lasted sort of 8 or 9 days.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose on the whole, we have actually been sort of quite lucky, but certainly last year we were sort of shut down for sort of 3.5 months. So for sort of, I think that sort of, it's the uncertainty that really sort of was the toughest thing to sort of get through, because you sort of, everyone needs money to be able to survive and pay mortgages and do all those sorts of things. And obviously having a young family and all that sort of stuff. It was pretty hard, but as you said, it's sort of, I suppose that sort of that mental toughness to sort of go that you know that you're going to get through, but it's a matter of being able to sort of find a way, and you're trying to find the positives in everything that you do in life, whether it be in the day-to-day stuff that you're doing with your family or at work or with your friends. Or for me, when I'm sort of behind the wheel of a race car, sometimes you can be having a really bad race or whatever, but it's about trying to sort of extract those positives and take those positives to sort of be able to build on and improve yourself as a professional person, or like what we've all been discovering lately as an individual, to be able to sort of use it as a coping mechanism.
Yeah, almost being able to compartmentalize the situation at hand. As a professional, any of the athletes and stuff that I've spoken to on the podcast, and just from the experience of being able to deal with them in person as well, you start to understand that professionals get really good at being able to deal with the highs and the lows of their chosen sport. Obviously, as I mentioned, in racing, there's some massive highs, but some big lows as well. And as I said, a lot of the time it seems to be outside of your control. So what are some of the tools that you've been able to add, I guess, to your toolkit on the mental side of things to be able to mentally prepare for a race weekend, but also be able to deal with the frustrating ones where you do get taken out, or you might get a flat tire or whatever it may be, and it doesn't happen to go your way? How do you deal with those highs and lows?
Look, for me, I've been doing this for a very long time, and like you said, there's the highs are massive, but the lows can be sort of probably equally as massive. It's about trying to find that sort of middle ground, and sort of don't get carried away with the amazing highs. You enjoy them for what they are at the time, but you know that those highs don't last forever. It's that old 15 minutes of fame thing and all that sort of stuff. It's about trying to sort of find that sort of middle ground, and not let yourself go too far in one way or the other. Part of the mental preparation, I suppose, for us in terms of racing, is you're trying to sort of prepare yourself mentally for the physical side, but you've also, it's the mental side of it is just as important as well. So it's a mental sort of approach. You've got to, there's so many variables that can happen sort of over a race weekend and during a race. And these days I try not to sort of get too tied up in the worrying about sort of, I suppose, what's outside your control. You've kind of got to, I very much believe that you've got to, especially with what we do, you've got to be able to react and respond as things are happening, and it's about having the decision making to make the right decisions at the time. You can have all the scenarios built up into your head about this may or may not happen in the race. And obviously, as a team, we'll sit down and we discuss strategies and everything like that based on weather. There's so many different variables that will obviously sort of build into that. But at the end of the day, some of those best laid plans, as soon as the race starts, can be thrown out the window. Like you said, for so many different reasons that can be totally outside your control. Something happens in the race, something happens with your car, you make a mistake, whatever it might be. So yes, you go in with a plan, but for me, I definitely don't go in with an expectation, because you go in expecting something. Generally, that will only ever lead to sort of disappointment. So I really try and go in things with a very open mind in any race that I do. And it's about, as I said, it's trying to deal with the situations as they come up, and use that decision-making process that comes from, I suppose, in my situation now, I've been doing it for such a long time. You also learn to control your emotions and not sort of let the hot-headedness sort of come into it, which, again, in our sport, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of adrenaline going on at the time. It's very easy to make an emotional or a reactive decision based on what's going on. But as we all know, in not only just in sport but also in life, sometimes the emotional decision or the reactionary decision is probably not the best decision that you can make. So, as I said before, it's trying to control those highs and lows and trying to find for yourself. And this is one thing I suppose I've probably worked on with myself very much over the years. It's finding that sort of happy middle ground where I sort of try not to deviate too far away from that. I don't get carried away with the highs, but again, don't get dragged into the lows as well.
Yeah, much easier said than done.
Much easier said than done.
I read a book recently by an author, Ryan Holiday. I don't know if you've ever read it or heard of it before, called "Stillness is the Key," and he talks a lot about that, about almost being able to have that little gap between the stimulus and the reaction. So obviously at the time it's super, super difficult to be able to do it. It's like I said, much easier said than done.
Well, one of the other things, because I do a lot of coaching of young drivers and all that sort of stuff, and one of the things I always try and sort of say to them is panic slowly when something's not going your way or something's happening in a race. Panic slowly. Give yourself that bit of time to think before you react or with whatever's going on around you. Because like what was said, is sometimes the panic reaction is usually the wrong one.
Love that. Panic slowly. That's a good one. I had maybe 6 months ago, it might have been, I had Andre Heimgartner on the show, and something that I found extremely intriguing was how for you race car drivers, outside of race weekend, a lot of the time you don't actually have time in the car on the track. So, let's use an example of a football or a basketballer. Outside of game day, they're spending hours every single day with the ball in hand or on the court or whatever it may be, and that's the case for a lot of sports. But with racing, it seems almost odd that the only time you're really in the car is when it gets to the most important part, and that's race weekend. So outside of race weekend, what do you do to keep yourself mentally and physically prepared? And then also, is there certain ways you're spending time, like in a simulator or something like that, to be able to keep the touch up for when you get to race weekend so you can perform on the day?
Yeah, like you said, look, our sport is very different. Like, it's not like we just sort of jump in the car 3 or 4 times a week like a normal sports person would, like a footy player or tennis or cricket or anything like that. So obviously, every time we go out in the car, it costs a lot of money. So one of the things they did bring in many years ago to try and sort of control the expenditure of teams was to minimise the amount of testing and all that sort of stuff. So any time that you can be in a car driving or doing anything is obviously sort of going to help you. And especially for the situation, say, that I'm in, it's the V8 supercars, because I only do the endurance races every year. So for this year, provided it obviously still happens with COVID, so Bathurst will be the only race that I sort of do in the V8 supercars. So again, you use that footy analogy. It's like I'm going from sitting on the sidelines to playing in the AFL grand final
on the G,
having not kicked a having not played a game all year. So, so from my perspective, anytime I can get behind the wheel and drive a car or do anything, it's a benefit to sort of what I'm ultimately trying to achieve at Bathurst later on in the year. So, outside of racing, as I say to people, I do have a real job, but a lot of people don't classify it as a real job. But I do the stunt show up here at Movie World on the Gold Coast, and it's been sort of home for me for the last kind of 13 years. So, yes, driving a car in the stunt show out there is incredibly different to driving a V8 supercar around Bathurst, but it's still that seat of the pants feeling. It's still having that reaction to feeling what a car's doing and what you as a driver can do to get the best out of it. So, yes, completely worlds apart from a V8 supercar at Bathurst, but it's still giving you that feeling of responding and reacting, or any time I can get behind the wheel of a car. So even like last week, I was out at Queensland Raceway, and a mate of mine's actually just bought an old V8 supercar, which actually is a car that I drove about 12 years ago, and just out there sort of driving that.
It all counts.
Yeah, always in cars and driving. Yeah. So anything that you can do, like even for me, on a normal year, again, outside of COVID times, we do a lot of sponsor ride days and taking guests for rides in the V8 supercar. For me, again, that's invaluable, because the more time you can be behind the wheel of a car, obviously the better it's going to be for you. But it's also about making sure that it's also quality over quantity, to be able to, every time I'm driving a car, I suppose it's that being able to analyze what it is that I'm doing, and get your mind thinking about what the car's doing and what you need it to do. It's not just kind of get in and go, I just went for a drive around the track and don't think about it. And like we touched on before, the mental side of it is just as important. So that you're thinking about the car. What's the car doing? What do you need the car to do? What, as a driver, can you do to improve yourself to get more out of the car? Because I think sort of our game, it's kind of evolved over the last probably sort of 10 years, but in every other sport and every other sort of professional discipline, people have coaches. Yet in motorsport, sort of the idea of having a coach is only until very recent times has always been sort of that, oh no, we don't need coaches. It's that sort of, I suppose it's a bit of bravado or a bit of ego or whatever it is. But I think these days, more and more people are turning to coaches to help improve their own performance, because it's all we always focus on trying to get the best out of the car, but we as the drivers, we are an important part of getting the best out of the car, and being able to sort of analyze our own performance is a huge thing as well.
Mate, even when you head down and get the milk, you'll be able to get behind the wheel and give it a thrash on the way down to the supermarket. In terms of simulators, is there any form of simulator that you can use with the V8s that is as close to the actual experience as possible? Like I know in the F1s, the drivers spend a lot of time behind, like in the simulator, trying to simulate it as close as they can to race day or conditions on the track. Is there anything like that here in Australia with the V8s, or is it pretty far off?
Yeah, look, a lot of the guys, especially since COVID, really sort of have embraced sort of sim racing and all that sort of stuff, because, again, obviously driving a simulator versus driving a V8 supercar around Bathurst, they're completely worlds apart. But the thing that the sim racing does actually give you is it allows you to sort of hone your racecraft side of things. It's really good for learning racetracks in terms of a circuit that you've never been to before. It's a really good way, because the technology in the sims and everything like that, it's a real good learning tool. So yeah, like I don't have a sim at home, but sort of the Porsche team that I do a lot of coaching for, their head office is only sort of half an hour from my place. They've got like a full motion simulator. Like this thing's like 120 odd grand worth of technology and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, any chance I can, I'll sort of definitely sort of jump on there. And especially as we get closer to sort of the endurance races, I'll definitely be spending a bit of time up there to jump on the sim, and just to, again, anything that you can do to improve your own performance is obviously going to help on race day.
When you mentioned before about the stunt driving, how did you get into that? Is that something that just an opportunity that came about because you were in the race world and it was a bit of a connection thing, or is that something you had to, like, was it hard to learn, or like how did that whole experience come about?
Yeah, look, it was a really weird thing. How it came about was I was actually standing at Brisbane Airport, about to get on a plane and go to Europe for 4 weeks, because I was going to go do Nürburgring 24-hour race over there, and got a phone call from a friend of mine in Sydney. This is back in early 2008. And he said, oh, have you seen Movie World? They're applying for stunt drivers, some new stunt show they're doing out there. And I was like, no, I hadn't heard about it. And he quickly emailed me the link to it. And I'm literally standing at Brisbane Airport, sort of waiting to sort of check in at the international terminal. opened the ad up, saw the ad, and applications actually closed that afternoon.
Okay.
And they wanted a video reel of what you've done and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm on a plane in an hour. There's not much I can really do. So I quickly just shot them an email just saying, look, I'd only just seen the ad, would really love the opportunity to apply.
Yep.
Sent them through a bit of my racing sort of CV and everything like that. And just said, look, unfortunately, I'm about to get on a plane. I'm going to be gone for nearly 4 weeks. And literally before I got on the plane, checked my emails, and there was an email there saying, yeah, look, we'd love you to come along to the auditions. We'll keep you posted. And it kind of went from there. There was an open audition. I think they ended up auditioning just over 400 people. Well, they had 400 applicants, I think it was. And they did 3 days worth of driving auditions up here at Paul Morris, who used to race himself at the Holden Performance Driving Centre. And they did like a morning and an afternoon on each of the days. And so, yeah, they sort of did a bit of a cull. And then out of that, they obviously culled that down to a smaller group that got called back for a second audition. And yeah, thankfully I got all the way through and was part of the original cast. And our original show kicked off on Boxing Day 2008. And as I said, been there ever since. And since then, there's been sort of a few different changes in the show.
Yep.
But one of the toughest things for me was in the original show, we did driving on 2 wheels. So you had the ramp there and you drive up and drive on 2 wheels. So for me, it was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done in terms of driving, because it was a complete different mindset in terms of, because as you go up the ramp, you've literally got to sort of drive up and then sort of really sort of kick it off the ramp and get it to the point where it feels like the car wants to roll over, but that's basically right where your balance point is. So your brain kicks in, and all the time, every time in the early days coming off the ramp, I'd just keep wanting to turn down because your brain's sort of going, this is wrong. And instinctively, you want to sort of drop the car down. Whereas in fact, as I said, you've actually got to turn up the ramp to really get the car to kick and come off high to be right in the sweet spot. So it was definitely really challenging. And again, it's that whole mental game, because the physical skills, it wasn't physically hard to do, but it was the mental challenge of trying to sort of find that sweet spot where the car needed to be and then be able to sort of balance it there. Again, like anything, once you know how to do it, it's relatively easy. But that learning process and that sort of that trust and having that sort of belief as to this is what you actually needed to do was, for me, in terms of driving, is definitely probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I can imagine. Is it something now that is it almost like you can just mentally switch off and go out there and do your thing, or you still have to really put a lot of thought into the process when you go out and do it now after having done the show so many times? Obviously, you said it changes from time to time. Is it still something that's really mentally stimulating for you now?
Oh, absolutely. Look, unfortunately, we don't do the 2-wheeling in the show anymore. But part of the show now, so I sort of manage the day-to-day running of the show. So I still perform in the show, but also any you guys that we have coming through, I sort of train them up. One of the big things that I say to all the guys coming through is that you can't get complacent out there. Like, I've been doing the show for 13 years now. I've done thousands of shows out there. But every time it's always going to be that little bit different. You can't allow yourself to get complacent in anything that you do, especially when you're driving cars and drifting around and you've got walls and other cars and everything like that. So it's one of the things I really sort of hammer into the team. It's just every time you've got to be mentally sharp and on your game out there, because yes, as I said, we're having a lot of fun out there, but it's also being very visually aware of where the other car is out on set, where there's performers on set, where you're trying to position your car and everything like that. So again, it's not physically demanding out there, but again, it's that mental where you've got to be sharp and on your game, because obviously, especially when you've got capacity of sort of 1,800 people sitting in there sort of potentially watching you, any mistake is obviously going to be seen by a lot of people. And again, we're running a very professional show out there. There's a huge amount of rehearsals and everything that goes on behind the scenes to make it look what it does when we're out there doing the shows. So yeah, the mental side of it, it's still, you definitely can't become complacent in anything that you do in life, especially in your professional life.
Bloody oath. With just before we move on, I want to touch on some physical stuff in a second in the race car, but back to the mental side just quickly. As I mentioned, like I'm a pretty big fan of the F1s and the V8s, but you often see, particularly in F1s, I mean, those cars are outrageously, what do you call it? They like, one tap of the front wheel and they're done for the race. I see quite often, the drivers that end up out of the race super early, let's say first lap, all the prep's gone into that race weekend. They've done practice, qualifying and whatnot. Mentally, they've invested in it, and then they're out in like the first lap. How do you deal with something like that? Obviously, you said that you've gotten a lot better at staying neutral and not getting too high with the highs or too low with the lows. But something like that, it's got to be difficult to be able to just walk away from the car and kind of just forget about it and move on when you put so much time and energy into that one race.
Yeah, it's hard because everyone kind of looks at what we do and they look at us as very singular, that we're the driver out there and everything like that. But people forget that there's a whole team of people behind us. So especially at like a Formula One level, like in some of the top teams, you're talking like a staffing level of well in excess of 500 people. Also, 2 guys can go drive a car on a race weekend. So a lot of the time your disappointment is not just for yourself.
Yeah.
There's a whole team of people there behind you, same as like in the V8 supercars. Like, so for the team that I drive for, Walkinshaw Andretti United, we're sort of about 40 to 45 people.
Yep.
And not every one of those people are at the racetrack. And then you've got your corporate partners, you've got your fans and everything like that. So it's not just about yourself. There's a massive team of people behind you that are doing just as much work as what you are to be able to sort of to see the team and everything succeed. And then, as I said, you've got your fans and everything like that, and the sponsors and that. So there's a lot of pressure and expectation. And so yeah, in those times of disappointment, for me in particular, it's, yes, there's my own personal disappointment, but it's the disappointment for every person that's on our team, our partners, our fans, and everything like that, because it's not just about you out there. There's a huge sort of team behind you making it possible.
Yeah. Speaking of the races, I really wanted to ask you about Bathurst. So, in terms of the physical demand of a race car, how's that experience on a track like Bathurst, particularly in the endurance races when you're doing a shitload of laps? Can you give us a bit of an insight into what that's actually like?
Yeah, look, as I say to people, it's especially when we do ride days and you get people in the passenger seat, the first thing that most people say is just how hot it is in the car, because there's no electric windows, there's no air conditioning, like the windows are all sort of bolted up, like they're Perspex windows. And that's the first thing that people really sort of recognize with. And as I say to people, the easiest way to describe what it's like in the car is the general rule of thumb that we work on is whatever the ambient temperature is, your cabin temperature is about 20 to 25 degrees above ambient. So when you're looking at a early 30s ambient temperature, you're looking at sort of mid to high 50s, approaching 60 degrees.
Crazy
cabin temperature in the car.
Yeah.
And that's where the physical side of it does become sort of quite challenging. Thankfully, Bathurst, usually in the October time slot that it is, this year it's now been delayed through till November. You generally see probably sort of maybe mid to high 20s at best.
Yeah.
When we're looking now to potentially be racing there in November,
could be quite hot by then.
It's very probable that we could be sort of approaching sort of early to mid 30s. So cabin temperature for all of us is going to be a lot hotter than potentially what we've ever experienced before. These days, we are quite lucky that the teams have worked very hard over the last probably sort of 15 years with looking after the drivers. So we wear a cool suit under our driving suit, which is basically a vest that pumps chilled water. So it's trying to help keep your core body temperature down. There's a fan so we've got like an air duct that goes into the top of our helmet that pumps cool air into the top. So you've got sort of small holes in the top of your helmet. And so even during the race, when you get called in for a pit stop, so you're coming down Conrod Straight, which is the big long straight prior to sort of coming in the pits. So generally you'll get sort of the call from your crew as you come onto Conrod that you'll be pitting on this particular lap. And so it's at that point that you'll usually sort of unplug your helmet air. And even just that probably minute to maybe minute and a half without having your helmet air plugged in, you really start to notice the difference in terms of the temperature inside your helmet starts to sort of really increase. And then even as you go to come into pit lane, you'll start to unplug your cool suit. So again, which is only probably about 30 to 45 seconds, you won't have your cool suit plugged in. And again, you already notice a small difference with that. So yeah, the physical side of it can get quite sort of quite hard out there, especially when, and I've had this before, and I think nearly everyone in V8 supercars has, where you end up having a failure with the cool suit where it basically stops pumping water for whatever reason. There's been a drama. Generally, the biggest problem with them is because we use dry ice to sort of chill it. So you run sort of the cool box temperature somewhere between sort of 7 to 10 degrees. But if you end up with too much dry ice in there, you can actually freeze the system. So it just stops basically pumping water. And when it stops pumping the water, you pretty much will end up with a hot water blanket sitting on top of you, because the water that's sitting in the vest on your chest
heats up,
starts to sort of heat up. And then so it becomes a real problem. So it's definitely not nice. But in times like that, especially when the temperature gets hot and you start to sort of feel it, it's your mental strength that gets you through on those days. The physical side of it is one part, but like as I say to so many people, you watch, like as I said, Hawaiian Ironman's a classic. You watch people sort of staggering towards the finish line, and when you create that mental sort of, that's where I've got to get to, you've got to have that mental strength. And you watch people get to the finish line of Hawaiian Ironman, and they literally get to the finish line and they collapse as they go over the line. If you move that finish line another 10, 15, 20 meters down the road, they'll still get to that finish line and then collapse, because it's that mental strength that you go, this is what I've got to do. And especially for me, having done this for quite some time now, you learn that mental strength. You dig deeper into yourself, deeper than what you ever realize. Like I remember in the early days of racing in the V8 supercars, the heat and the fatigue really got to me. And it wasn't because I didn't have the fitness to get through. It's learning that mental toughness to be able to sort of push your body past the point where your body would normally want to give up. It's just having that sort of mental sort of that toughness to basically drag your body through to what is your finish line, whether it be the pit stop or the end of the race or whatever it is you've got to do. And again, for us, obviously, very different from a lot of sports, in those endurance races, you've got to sort of push your body to get through your stint or whatever. And you get out of the car, and then maybe an hour and a half later, you're back in the car. So again, it's having that mental toughness to prepare yourself to get back in and endure what you've done already, and you've got to go through that whole process again.
Physically, what do you do in that little break? You know, you typically see that's an example of football. Again, the guys that are on the bench, if they're on there for too long, or, you know, you got an extended time off the field, they might jump on the bike and get the legs moving just to make sure that they're still warm to jump back on the field and get going again. Is the car the same situation? Are you still staying relatively semi-active in that time out of the car, or are you taking it to rest completely to give your body the recovery it needs?
Look, everyone's different. And I think it's one of those things that it's finding what works for you. I think pretty much, or predominantly, the first thing that all of us will do as soon as you get out of the car, it's to try and cool your core body temperature down. So a lot of guys will either have an ice bath or something like that, or at least get out of your hot race gear and that, just to try and sort of cool your core body temperature down. So we have an ice bath there. So I'll usually sort of, as soon as you get out of the car, you'll probably go and have like a 5-minute chat with your engineer, just to sort of pass on any information to your co-driver who's just obviously got in the car, whether there's any nuances with the car, or it's doing this or that, or there's something on the track, or whatever it might be, how the track grip might have changed, or anything that you can do for the guy that's got in the car to help get them back up to speed quicker with how the track's evolved, how the car's changed, or anything like that. So you'll generally, straight away, you'll have that conversation very quickly. Usually at that same time, you're trying to sort of obviously get some fluids back into your body, even though we do have the drink bottle in the car. But again, it's just getting fluids and getting some energy sort of back into your body. And then for me, I'll go straight across to the truck, strip off, jump in the ice bath for probably 5 to 10 minutes, just to cool the core body temperature down. And then after that, it's about just having something to eat, keep drinking, get into your next sort of race suit and get ready again. And then it's usually about being sort of back in the garage, because you pretty much all got to be on standby relatively straight away in case, for whatever reason, like if there's a drama with the other driver or something like that. So you can never sort of wander too far away from sort of the garage. But for me, usually, again, I'll probably sort of, if I know roughly when I've got to sort of be in the car, for probably 15, 20 minutes before, I'll just do some light stretches and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, just to sort of keep the body sort of
Stay
moving and
mobile.
everything like that. And basically preparing yourself to get back in the car. But yeah, it's hydration, it's food, it's cool the core body temperature, get dressed again and get ready to get back out there.
With the G-force, is that something that the body gets used to? Like, is it always you get that same feeling every single time you're going into a corner and slamming on the brakes, or going around a corner, a couple 100 kilometers an hour? Like, do you start to get used to that, or is it something that your body, like, you physically feel every single race, every lap?
No, your body learns to get used to that.
Yep.
And that's part of just it's also about fitness for what you do. There's only so much for, like in any athlete, there's the fitness that you do to get ready for what you do. But same as like a footy player, and that it's all about your match fitness and everything like that.
It's all relative,
and same in the car. And the G forces and all that sort of stuff. Again, when we do sponsored ride days and you've got people in the car, that's one of the first things that they notice. It's not probably even so much the cornering force, it's the braking, how hard the brakes can be applied, and that de-acceleration. It's funny, like you'll have someone in the passenger seat at a ride day, and the first time you put the brakes on really hard, like you watch their head basically snap forward, because again, they're just not prepared for it or anticipating what it's potentially like.
I've done a couple of laps around Sandown. I did a few in the driver's seat, then jumped in the passenger seat straight afterwards, and yeah, it was pretty mental.
Yeah. So yeah, again, after you've done it for long enough, your body does get sort of used to it. But probably the biggest one is that I do notice is it's the strength within your neck, because obviously with your helmet on and everything like that, you're adding weight to your head. So sort of in the lateral side of things, with sort of the extra weight of your helmet on and everything like that, when you haven't been in the car for a little while, that's probably the first thing that you do actually start to sort of notice. Again, especially sort of in those longer races. But again, most of us generally have some kind of like a neck strengthening or conditioning exercise that you do away from the car, just to sort of keep your neck muscles up. And especially at that elite level of like those Formula One drivers, like they're sort of pulling sort of 4, 5, 5.5 G in the lateral, and up to sort of 3, even 4 Gs under sort of braking. So you look at the Formula One guys, they're all sort of relatively short, incredibly fit guys, but you just look at the size of their neck. Like they've kind of got like the neck of like a rugby player, because they do need that sort of neck strength to be able to basically hold their head up for. They're doing sort of a 250 odd kilometer race, where you've constantly got that sort of that lateral G going on.
Mate, before we wrap things up, I just wanted to just staying on the subject of the physical side of things. How much work goes into physical prep away from the car? So in the gym with your strength training, you mentioned obviously there's a lot of exercise and strength work that needs to go on with the neck and stuff like that. But outside of that, what does a typical resistance or strength session look like for you, if any, at all?
Yeah, look, for me, it's all about, I suppose, probably more than anything, it's just doing something all the time. Again, we're not sort of in the front pack of a rugby scrum or anything like that. So I don't need to be in the gym sort of bench pressing 250 kilos or anything like that. I'm definitely not built for that. So for me, it's more probably, most of my training is obviously based around sort of endurance training, and that's a lot of running, a lot of cycling, trying to sort of get back into to do a bit of swimming and all that sort of stuff, because again, anything that's more sort of endurance related is obviously more beneficial for what I need out of myself. And I think one of those things for me is, over the years of doing this for quite some time, it's also just, it's knowing what your body needs in terms of your training, in terms of your nutrition, your hydration and everything like that. I think the more you do something, the better you become at understanding your own body. A lot of people very early on, and I was very guilty of this early in my career, is you look at what other people are doing in terms of their preparation, and you're like, oh yeah, I need to be doing that, and then I need to be doing what he's doing and all that sort of stuff. And you can get a little bit lost in terms of trying to sort of replicate what everyone else is doing. It's understanding your own physical requirements and also your own physical limitations as to what is it that your body ultimately needs for what it is that you're wanting to do. So I think that's, for me, probably the best thing that I've learned in my career, is just what what does my body need? And as I said, that's involving nutrition,
Yeah.
hydration, and just also the mental preparation as well as you're going into a race, whether it be in the week leading up to it or that morning of. It's when you get to that point where your brain switches over and you're like, right, this is what we're here to do. And you just get into that focus mode of what it is that you need to do. And
That
I
flow
think
state.
exactly, and that's something that you just learn with time. And the more you do something, I think the better you get at finding those key things for yourself.
Yeah. Love that. And that applies for, for everyone that's tuned in. That applies for everything, particularly with health and fitness outs. Obviously, most people that are listening aren't race car drivers, but it definitely applies to everyone in regards to training, nutrition, recovery, the whole mindset side of things. I talk a lot about my morning routine and things like that. And then it comes down to what works best for you. What works for you and I probably doesn't work for everyone else listening. So it's about finding what works best for you. But mate, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I've taken a lot out of it. It was really enjoyable. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure that everyone that's tuned in has taken away a lot of value as well. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, mate. And stay safe down there in Melbourne. Hope you guys get out of lockdown real soon.
So do I, mate. So do I. If everyone who has tuned in, we'd love for you to take a screenshot of this episode for us. Tag us on your Instagram story. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's chat. Go and I'll have the links to all Warren's socials in the show notes. So make sure you go and give him a follow and keep up with how he's going this year and beyond. But again, thank you, mate, and very much appreciate it. And good luck for the rest of the year.
Thanks, mate. Chat soon.
Appreciate it.